The laugh came first. Not loud, not cruel, just careless. On the evening of October 3rd, 1839, as rain soaked the cane fields outside Saint-Brûlée Parish, Baron Alistair Gray laughed at a dying man who could no longer stand. Witnesses later struggled to explain why that laugh haunted them more than the death itself. The slave, known only in plantation ledgers as Jonah, age unknown, had been dragged from the sugar mill after collapsing beside the press. His body was already failing. His breath sounded wet. His wrists were raw where iron had lived too long. When Jonah spoke, his voice was barely there. "You won't see it," he said, "but it will see you." The overseer raised his whip. The workers looked away, and the Baron, owner of Grey Haven Plantation, future groom, devout church benefactor, laughed. A thin sound, dismissive, final. By dawn, Jonah was dead. By winter, the Baron would be buried in a sealed casket that no one was allowed to open. And between those two moments lies a silence so carefully buried that Saint-Brûlée erased it from its sermons, its birth records, and its marriage announcements. Because curses are easier to dismiss than guilt, and laughter is easier than listening. Saint-Brûlée Parish did not see itself as cruel. It saw itself as ordered. Founded in 1811 along a bend of the river, the town prided itself on clean white churches, disciplined families, and the belief that suffering had a place, so long as it remained invisible. Baron Gray embodied this philosophy. He was young by planter standards, educated in Charleston, known for donating hymnals to the church and funding an orphan annex behind the rectory. His upcoming marriage to Eleanor Whitcomb was to be the most celebrated union the parish had seen in a decade. But Grey Haven Plantation told a different story. Ledgers from the period, what few remain, show sudden name removals. Workers listed as transferred with no destination. Children marked as reassigned without explanation. And then there are the gaps. Entire weeks where no deaths were recorded despite rising production. Jonah appears only once in the records, and then never again. Because Jonah was not meant to be remembered. The word curse is misleading. Jonah never shouted, never invoked spirits, never threatened fire or blood. What he said, according to two independent accounts recorded decades later, was quieter than that. He said, "You will hear them walking before the bells ring." At the time, no one understood. Saint-Brûlée's church bells rang at fixed hours. The dead were buried before sundown. Silence after dark was enforced. But 3 nights after Jonah's burial, the night watchman reported footsteps along the river road. No lanterns, no voices, just walking. When he called out, the sound stopped. By the 4th night, dogs refused to leave their kennels. By the 6th, the church bell rang once at 3:12 a.m., without anyone pulling the rope. The priest blamed weather. The Baron blamed imagination. And the town agreed, because agreement kept things intact. Preparations continued. Invitations printed. Veils sewn. Candles ordered in bulk. But something subtle began to rot. Baron Gray complained of sleeplessness. He said the floorboards whispered when he lay down, that he smelled damp earth inside locked rooms. One servant claimed she saw muddy footprints leading away from his bedroom door. She was dismissed that same morning. Then came the final night before the wedding. At exactly midnight, the orphan annex bell rang 3 times. No one was assigned to it. Inside the Baron's estate, guests heard him screaming, not in pain, but in recognition. When they broke down the door, they found him collapsed beside the window, staring outward toward the cane fields. His eyes were open. His mouth was smiling. And his boots, custom-made, never worn in soil, were caked with river mud. The wedding never happened. The church never mentioned why. And Jonah's grave was never found. Baron Gray's funeral took place 3 days after his death. No viewing, no procession, no questions. The casket arrived already sealed, reinforced with iron clasps usually reserved for long river transports. The official explanation was decay. The unofficial one never reached paper. The priest, Father Lucien Moreau, delivered a sermon about humility and obedience. He spoke of divine order, of how God removes even the powerful without warning. But he never said the Baron's name. Those seated closest to the altar later described an odor beneath the incense. Not rot, not death, wet soil. As the casket was lowered, one of the iron clasps split cleanly down the middle. No one reacted. The choir sang louder. The grave was filled quickly, as if speed itself could correct a mistake. That night, the bell rang again. Once. The orphan annex behind Saint-Brûlée Church had always been strange. Built with plantation funds, it housed children who arrived without records, no surnames, no origins, no relatives willing to claim them. The church called it mercy. The children called it quiet. After the Baron's death, the sisters reported disturbances, footsteps in the hall after curfew, doors opening without sound, children waking with mud on their feet. One boy, Samuel Pike, refused to sleep indoors. When asked why, he said the walls were too close to the field. The sisters punished him. 2 weeks later, Samuel vanished. The ledger listed him as relocated. No destination given. It began happening only on Sundays. At dusk, townspeople heard movement along the river road. Slow, deliberate, many feet moving together. Those who looked from windows saw nothing. Those who stepped outside never spoke of it again. By December, families locked doors before sunset. Sermons shortened. Confession lines lengthened. Father Moreau insisted the sounds were imagination, the product of grief and superstition. But even he stopped walking alone after dark. On Christmas Eve, the bells rang 12 times. Not in sequence, not in rhythm, as if counted by someone unfamiliar with time. Eleanor Whitcomb never remarried. She donated the wedding candles to the church and withdrew from public life. In her final diary, found decades later, she wrote a single sentence repeated on 6 pages. He heard them walking before the bells rang. The Baron's estate was quietly absorbed by the parish. The cane fields expanded. Production increased. And yet, every year, on the anniversary of Jonah's death, the soil near the river softened as if freshly turned. No markers, no names, just earth that refused to stay closed. In January of 1840, Saint-Brûlée's church records began to change. Not disappear, not burn, change. Baptism dates shifted by days. Names appeared misspelled, then corrected in different handwriting. Margins filled with faint impressions, as though someone had written hard on a previous page and the pressure remained. Father Moreau blamed humidity. But the archivist, an aging deacon named Henri Duclos, noticed something else. Whenever he copied the records at night, his hands came away stained dark, as if ink had soaked through his skin. Water did not wash it away. Ash did not remove it. The marks faded only by morning. Duclos stopped sleeping. On February 2nd, he locked himself inside the records room and refused to open the door. When it was forced, he was found sitting upright, hands folded, staring at the shelf where plantation ledgers were kept. Every book from Grey Haven was missing. The shelf beneath them was wet. At the orphan annex, something spread quietly. The children began drawing. Not houses, not animals, not crosses. They drew a tall figure standing in a field, head lowered, feet darkened as if soaked. The face was never finished. Always blurred, always erased. When questioned, the children gave identical answers. He doesn't like being remembered wrong. The sisters burned the drawings. The next morning, the ashes were arranged neatly on the floor, shaped like footprints leading toward the church. That night, 3 children woke screaming at the same moment, claiming someone had counted them aloud in the dark. One was missing by morning. Father Moreau broke protocol on the first Sunday of Lent. He spoke without scripture. He spoke of labor, of debt, of the danger of believing that authority erased consequence. His voice shook when he said, "God hears what we refuse to hear." Mid-sermon, the church bell rang. Once, the rope was untouched. Congregants later swore the sound came from beneath the floor. Moreau ended the service early. That evening, he sealed the crypt beneath the church and ordered no one to enter it again. 2 days later, he was found kneeling inside it. The seal was unbroken. Spring came early that year. Too early. Crops sprouted in strange lines, bending toward the river rather than the sun. Workers reported the sensation of being washed from below the soil, as if the ground itself remembered weight. One overseer attempted to drain the low fields. The trench collapsed inward, revealing old iron, bone fragments, and scraps of cloth stamped with the plantation mark. The trench filled itself overnight. By April, people began leaving Saint-Brûlée. Those who stayed learned to ignore the walking. But the walking did not ignore them. By the summer of 1840, Saint-Brûlée no longer pretended nothing was wrong. Instead, it organized. A special committee was formed. 5 men, all landholders, all church donors, all connected in some way to Greyhaven. Their meetings were never recorded, but one surviving letter refers to their purpose plainly: to prevent disorder by correcting memory. They agreed on 3 actions: close the orphan annex, destroy redundant records, reconsecrate the river road. The children were dispersed without explanation. Some were sent upriver. Others simply vanished from the count. No farewells were permitted. On the final night before the annex closed, a sister reported hearing the children singing, not a hymn, but a counting rhyme with missing numbers. She resigned the next morning. On July 11th, a controlled fire was set behind the church. Officially, it was to burn damaged documents and furniture from the annex. Witnesses later admitted that plantation ledgers were added quietly, page by page, after dusk. The fire burned low and steady. Too steady. The smoke did not rise. It drifted along the ground, clinging to ankles and doorways. Several men claimed they smelled the cane fields burning, though no such fire existed. When the flames finally died, nothing recognizable remained, except the bell rope, unburned, hanging loose, swaying, though there was no wind. The bell rang once that night. The committee ordered the river road consecrated. Holy water, prayers, new gravel laid over old ground. For 3 days, the road remained quiet. On the 4th night, townspeople awoke to the sound of walking again. Closer now, louder, no longer cautious. By morning, the gravel had shifted into long, uneven ridges, as if pressed down repeatedly by bare feet. Someone had written a word in the dirt near the bend. Listen, it was gone by noon. The committee disbanded the following week. 2 members fell ill. 1 moved west. 1 was found drowned in shallow water. No one claimed responsibility. The final official record of Saint-Brûlée was written on September 3, 1841. It noted the parish's consolidation with a neighboring town and the reassignment of clergy. No reason was given. The church bell was removed for repair. It was never reinstalled. Years later, travelers passing the abandoned site reported hearing footsteps at dusk and the faint sound of counting carried on the river wind. Always stopping short. Always waiting for someone to answer. Saint-Brûlée did not vanish all at once. It faded. Early maps from the 1850s still mark the parish. Light ink, uncertain borders. Later editions reduce it to a bend in the river with no name attached. By the turn of the century, the land is simply described as unsettled low ground. But surveyors who worked the area left personal notes. They complained of miscounted crew members, of tools found caked in mud before being used, of footsteps heard behind them that stopped when they turned. One map from 1897 bears a penciled annotation, never meant for print. Road sounds occupied at dusk. The map was never finalized. The curse was never punishment. It was testimony. Jonah did not promise vengeance. He warned of memory returning on its own terms, of truth moving the way bodies move, slow, collective, impossible to stop once in motion. You will hear them walking before the bells ring. The bells marked order. The walking marked reckoning. What Saint-Brûlée tried to bury was not a man, but a system that depended on silence to survive. And silence, once broken, does not heal. In 1912, a woman named Clara Duclos, granddaughter of the archivist, gave an interview to a traveling folklorist. She described a childhood spent near the old river road. Every Sunday at dusk, she heard counting. Not numbers she recognized. Not voices she could place. When asked what she believed happened to Saint-Brûlée, she said, "They thought forgetting was mercy, but forgetting just made the ground restless." She died the following winter. Her gravestone bears no dates. Today, the land where Saint-Brûlée once stood is avoided. Not marked. Not fenced. Not discussed. Local fishermen still claim that on certain evenings, the river carries sound against the current, slow steps, many together, followed by a pause, as if waiting for permission. The bells never rang again because bells end things. And some truths are not meant to end, only to be acknowledged. The Baron laughed because laughter protects power. He never lived to hear the answer. But the land did, and it still listens.